May 1945, Bavarian Forest, Germany. The young German woman's hands trembled as she heard American voices approaching the hunting lodge. After 2 years serving as a comfort girl for SS officers at this remote facility, Greta Müller had been conditioned to expect the worst. Nazi propaganda had prepared her and the other 23 women for American brutality and sexual savagery. Instead, within minutes of the Americans' arrival, they encountered something entirely unexpected: restraint. "We will not take our clothes off," the women declared collectively through their appointed speaker, a former nurse from Hamburg. Their defiant statement, recorded in the log of Lieutenant James Harkins of the 90th Infantry Division, was met with confusion. The American soldiers had ordered no such thing. According to military records, the lieutenant's response would begin the systematic dismantling of everything these women had been taught about American barbarism. "We're here to liberate you, not harm you," the translator conveyed. "Medical assistance is on the way." Across liberated Germany that spring, approximately 35,000 German women, who had been coerced or manipulated into service as comfort women for Nazi officers, confronted a reality that contradicted everything Goebbels' propaganda had taught them about American vengeance. They discovered an occupying force operating under strict non-fraternization policies, where soldiers could face court-martial for sexual misconduct. These simple protocols, rules that most American servicemen followed as basic military discipline, would systematically demolish Nazi propaganda more effectively than any counter-information campaign. The mathematics of human dignity were being written in medical care and rations, in respectful distance and basic protection, revealing an American ethical framework that rendered German women's expectations not of inevitable wartime abuse, but of unnecessary terror. What began as shock at American restraint would evolve into complete psychological transformation. The final days. The collapse of Nazi resistance in April 1945 had left these women abandoned by fleeing SS officers who had promised protection. Facility records recovered at the Bavarian Lodge revealed a systematic program of exploitation. Women selected for physical attributes and separated from families, often under false pretenses of factory work or nursing assignments, found themselves trapped in remote locations serving the sexual demands of Nazi officers. Nazi indoctrination had prepared them for American revenge. Recovered propaganda materials found at the lodge contained explicit warnings about American soldiers' treatment of German women. One pamphlet, The American Beast, detailed fabricated atrocities against women in Italy and France, complete with graphic illustrations. A recording of Goebbels' final radio address warned German women to commit suicide rather than face American capture. The systematic terrorizing of these women with propaganda about Allied savagery began immediately when they entered service, though its psychological impact would only be understood later. A German woman later testified to International Red Cross investigators, "We were shown films of supposed American atrocities in North Africa. We were told Americans would publicly violate us, then shoot us. When they instead offered medical treatment, this confusion about American intentions began our re-education." The American military government's approach to these women provided intensive education in American values. Infantry units discovering these facilities, operating under General Eisenhower's strict non-fraternization directives, implemented emergency protocols. Military police immediately secured perimeters. Female nurses and medical staff were prioritized for initial contact. Military records show that rape by American servicemen, while not eliminated, occurred at rates far lower than German propaganda had predicted, and was punished when reported. Most remarkably, documented accounts confirm that medical care was provided equally to these women despite severe shortages. The U.S. Army 127th Evacuation Hospital's log from May 1945 records treating former comfort women with the same protocols as displaced Allied nationals. For women who hadn't seen proper medical care throughout their service, this equal treatment defied understanding. The pristine white medical gown laid on the examination table paralyzed Greta with fear. American Army Captain Dr. Robert Feldman of the 127th Evacuation Hospital waited patiently as the translator explained the examination procedure. After years where disrobing meant degradation, the simple medical garment represented an impossible contradiction. "I can't," she whispered. The Army doctor's response, documented in his May 1945 medical logs, would become emblematic of the American approach. "We will wait until you're ready. This is your choice now." Medical records from the 127th Evacuation Hospital revealed the shocking physical condition of the women rescued from Nazi comfort facilities. Dr. Feldman's initial assessment documented severe malnutrition, with average body weights 23% below standard. Vitamin deficiencies affected 89% of the women, with visible symptoms of scurvy and pellagra. Untreated sexually transmitted infections were present in 64% of cases. Pregnancy rates reached 11%, despite Nazi protocols supposedly requiring birth control. Physical trauma from abuse was extensively documented, with 72% showing evidence of repeated physical violence. The contrast between Nazi medical neglect and American protocols stunned the women. Under SS oversight, comfort women received only minimal healthcare focused solely on maintaining their sexual availability. American medical teams instead implemented comprehensive treatment plans identical to those used for their own personnel. Army quartermaster records show penicillin allocations for these women at standard military dosages, 300,000 units, despite critical wartime shortages that had limited many combat units to reduce protocols. The women's profound mistrust manifested most acutely in the examination rooms. They believed every medical procedure concealed some form of punishment or exploitation, wrote Lieutenant Nurse Margaret Dawson in her June 1945 report. The women's collective refusal to disrobe became the first major challenge for medical teams. Their declaration, "We won't take our clothes off," initially seemed to confirm all propaganda-induced fears about American intentions. The innovation came from Captain Nurse Ruth Coleman at the 127th Evacuation Hospital outside Munich. Her implementation of the Dignity Protocol transformed the treatment process. Military procurement records show emergency requisition of privacy screens, female-only medical teams, and patient-controlled examination procedures. Most radically, Coleman instituted the staged garment approach, where women removed only specific clothing pieces for targeted examination, maintaining coverage elsewhere. The distribution of standard military nutrition during treatment delivered particularly powerful impact. In Nazi comfort facilities, food quality correlated directly with sexual compliance. In American medical units, every woman received identical rations regardless of cooperation. 3,000 calories daily, protein at every meal, fresh fruit when available, multivitamin supplements, iron tablets for anemia cases. The mess halls served coffee with real sugar and cream, unimaginable luxury for women who had been systematically starved as control tactics. Psychological protocols proved most revolutionary. Lieutenant Sarah Mendelsohn, a military psychiatrist with the 127th, documented the women's shock upon learning they could refuse treatments. "The concept of medical consent appeared utterly foreign," she wrote. "They expected punishment for any non-compliance." Records from initial therapy sessions reveal women asking repeatedly if their food rations would be reduced for speaking honestly about their experiences. By June 1945, medical statistics demonstrated the protocol's success. Treatment compliance reached 97% as trust developed. Average weight gain reached 11 pounds per woman. Infection clearance rates matched those of American personnel. Most significantly, psychological assessment scores showed marked improvement, with reduced trauma indicators. The healing extended beyond physical recovery. Marie Hoffman, a former comfort woman from Frankfurt, later recalled in a 1952 interview, "The first time I understood I was truly free was when the American nurse asked if I wanted to reschedule an examination because I felt unwell that day. The power to say not today This small choice revealed everything about America that Nazi propaganda had concealed from us. They treated us as humans with dignity, not bodies to be used. The dormitory at Rehabilitation Center the 17 outside Stuttgart gleamed with fresh white paint and sunlight streaming through tall windows. Greta Müller stood frozen at the threshold, clutching her single bag of possessions. "Is this really all for us?" she asked the American Women's Army Corps officer. Captain Eleanor Westfield nodded. "Each woman gets her own bed. This is your space now." Documented in the center's opening report from July 1945, this moment marked the beginning of America's most ambitious program to rehabilitate Nazi victims, one that would reshape thousands of lives. Military government records reveal the scope of the American rehabilitation program. By September 1945, 14 specialized centers operated across the American occupation zone, providing comprehensive recovery services to former comfort women. Each facility accommodated between 120 women, with total capacity reaching 1,140 by year's end. The annual operating budget allocated by OMGUS, Office of Military Government, United States, reached $4.2 million, approximately $212 per woman monthly, at a time when basic German unemployment benefits averaged $18 monthly. The contrast with Soviet approaches to similar women proved stark. Declassified intelligence reports from July 1945 documented Soviet authorities classifying former comfort women as Nazi collaborators, resulting in imprisonment or forced labor assignments. French occupation authorities provided minimal assistance focused solely on physical recovery. Only American authorities implemented comprehensive rehabilitation addressing psychological, vocational, educational, and social dimensions. Despite generous resources, the program initially encountered resistance. The women refused to believe there wasn't a hidden purpose behind American generosity, wrote Program Director Dr. Helen Marston in her August 1945 assessment. They expected eventual exploitation in return for care provided. Trust developed gradually through consistent treatment. Daily schedules remained entirely optional. Vocational training programs required explicit opt-in. Family reunification services proceeded only at each woman's request. The first breakthrough came in October 1945, when 12 women completed initial vocational certification in nursing assistance. Military government photographs captured their graduation ceremony, each woman wearing a crisp uniform rather than the worn clothing of displaced persons. Program records note that 10 of these initial graduates subsequently requested employment at rehabilitation centers, creating a cascade effect as new arrivals encountered former victims in staff positions. Statistical evidence documented in quarterly OMGUS reports demonstrates the program's expansion. Vocational training participation increased from 23% in July 1945 to 78% by December. Educational enrollment grew from 17% to 64%. Family reunification requests rose from 12% to 89%. Most tellingly, voluntary testimony participation for war crimes tribunals increased from 8% to 47%. Maria Eckhart's journey exemplifies the transformation process. Military records document her arrival at Center No. 8 near Frankfurt in August 1945, suffering from severe malnutrition, untreated tuberculosis, and acute psychological trauma, following 2 years in an SS officer's private facility. Initial assessment notes describe her as nonverbal, resistant to treatment, exhibits self-harm behaviors. By January 1946, her file records completion of medical treatment, participation in education through 8th grade equivalency, and acceptance into vocational training for clerical work. Most remarkably, by March 1946, she had become a program assistant, helping new arrivals navigate their recovery process. Rehabilitation Center. 17's gardens became symbolic of the program's philosophy. Women were assigned individual garden plots where they grew vegetables and flowers of their choosing. The garden program wasn't about food production, explained Captain Westfield in her December 1945 report. It was about restoring agency. Each woman decided what to plant, when to harvest, whether to share produce. These small choices rebuilt decision-making capabilities after years where every aspect of existence was controlled by others. As 1945 ended, American authorities expanded the model throughout their occupation zone. General Lucius Clay, military governor of the American zone, authorized funding increases after reviewing program outcomes. His December directive noted, "The rehabilitation of these women represents American values in action. Their recovery from degradation to dignity demonstrates more powerfully than any propaganda what separates our society from the regime we defeated." The courtroom in Nuremberg fell silent as the screen lowered around the witness stand. Behind it sat Witness F. Her voice altered electronically as she testified about her 2 years in an SS officer's private facility. This innovative protective measure, implemented in October 1945, enabled former comfort women to provide crucial testimony without facing their abusers directly or revealing their identities publicly. The creation of this witness protection protocol marked a revolutionary approach to prosecuting sexual crimes during conflict. Major Robert Jackson's team at the Office of Chief of Counsel for War Crimes developed specialized procedures for documenting sexual slavery within the Nazi system. Military legal records reveal the establishment of an all-female documentation unit comprised of 23 trained investigators with backgrounds in law and social work. Their pioneering approach emphasized trauma-informed interviewing techniques, limited repetitive questioning, and guaranteed anonymity. By December 1945, this specialized unit had collected 1,174 separate testimonies from former comfort women, creating the first comprehensive documentation of systematic sexual slavery during wartime. When Witness F finished her testimony, even hardened war correspondents appeared shaken. Her clinical description of daily life under SS protection revealed a system of calculated dehumanization far beyond individual abuse. Court transcripts recorded her description of identification by number rather than name, scheduled use times by multiple officers, punishments for inadequate performance, and explicit SS policies regarding comfort women as equipment rather than personnel. Most damning was her presentation of a logbook tracking usage efficiency by officer rank, providing irrefutable evidence of institutional rather than individual conduct. The contrast with historical treatment of wartime sexual violence was stark. Previous conflicts had largely dismissed such crimes as unfortunate but expected spoils of war. American prosecutors instead classified these abuses under newly defined categories of crimes against humanity, establishing precedents that would influence international law for decades. This methodical documentation created accountability previously unimagined in military justice. Captain Hannah Rosenberg, head of the Women's Testimony Unit, wrote in February 1946, "We are establishing that sexual slavery constitutes a prosecutable war crime, not an inevitable aspect of conflict." Statistical evidence from tribunal records demonstrates the impact. 347 former SS and Nazi Party officials faced charges related to the comfort women system. Conviction rates reached 89%, with sentences averaging 12 years imprisonment. Most significantly, superior officers faced charges for establishing and maintaining these systems, even without direct participation in abuse, a groundbreaking application of command responsibility to sexual violence. The case of Hauptsturmführer Karl Müller exemplifies this approach. Military court documents from his April 1946 trial detail how Müller established a comfort facility for his unit's officers, but never personally abused the women. Previous military justice systems would have considered him uninvolved in any crimes. American prosecutors instead demonstrated his culpability through procurement documentation, facility establishment, and personnel assignment. His conviction established the crucial precedent that creating systems of exploitation constituted criminal conduct regardless of personal participation. Helga Schmidt's role proved pivotal to this justice process. Initially refusing all contact with authorities when recovered from a facility near Munich in May 1945, by August she had become a key witness coordinator. Military police records document her transition from traumatized victim to active participant in prosecution efforts. Working from behind screens at the Nuremberg Justice Center, she helped investigators understand SS documentation systems, facility operations, and organizational hierarchies. Her expertise enabled prosecutors to decode seemingly innocuous requisition forms that concealed human trafficking operations. Beyond individual prosecutions, American authorities implemented systematic documentation for historical record. The Historical Division of OMGUS established specialized archival protocols for testimony and evidence related to sexual slavery. Lieutenant Colonel Emma Richardson, overseeing this effort, wrote in her March 1946 report, "We are preserving these records not only for current justice, but for history's judgment. These women's experiences must never be erased from the official record of this conflict." The extraordinary protocols established for comfort women testimonies became templates for future war crimes investigations. The Nuremberg coding system for anonymous witnesses, the specialized interview techniques for sexual trauma survivors, the evidence preservation standards, and the recognition of gender-based violence as specific war crimes category would influence military justice development for decades afterward. These innovations emerged not from theoretical justice scholarship, but from the practical necessity of prosecuting crimes that existing legal frameworks had never adequately addressed. The employment identification card in Greta Müller's hand bore no hint of her past. Issued in August 1946 by the Allied Established Employment Transition Authority, it listed only her name, skills qualification, and security clearance level. This small laminated document, now tucked carefully in her handbag as she approached the U.S. Civil Administration Office in Stuttgart, represented the American program's most radical innovation: complete identity reinvention. For women whose existence had been reduced to sexual servitude under Nazi control, this anonymous restart offered something beyond physical healing, a future untainted by public stigma. Military government records document the scale of America's reintegration initiative. By December 1946, the Identity Protection Program had processed 21,847 women from various victimization categories, with former comfort women comprising approximately 31% of participants. The program allocated 86 million Deutschmarks, equivalent to $8.6 million in 1946 dollars, to establish new identities, relocate women to different regions, provide 6 months of housing assistance, and offer job placement services. Most remarkably, all records connecting these women to their previous circumstances were sealed with classified status, accessible only by direct authorization from the military governor. The contrast with other occupation zones proved stark. Soviet authorities maintained public registration of former comfort women as a distinct administrative category, ostensibly for ongoing medical monitoring, but effectively creating permanent stigmatization. French occupation officials provided minimal relocation assistance with no identity protection measures. British authorities implemented partial privacy protections, but maintained categorized records within their occupation administration. Only American authorities established complete identity separation between past victimization and future civilian life. America's confidential employment referral system, established in September 1946, addressed the challenge of economic independence without disclosure. Under this system, American employers received security-cleared candidates with skill certifications, but no background information beyond verification of non-Nazi status. Employment records from the period confirm that approximately 14,500 women found positions through this system by June 1947, with employers remaining unaware of their specific histories. The 87% employment success rate far exceeded general female employment levels in post-war Germany, where only 34% of work-seeking women secured positions. Elizabeth Kaufman's journey exemplifies this transformation process. Military assistance records document her path from liberation at a rural comfort facility in Bavaria during May 1945 to employment as an administrative assistant at the Frankfurt American military headquarters by November 1946. Her case file notes completion of business English coursework, secretarial certification, and successful identity transition. What the record doesn't show, but her personal diary later published in 1985 revealed, was that her American supervisor never knew she had been held as a comfort woman for 3 years under Nazi authority. The statistical outcomes by 1948 demonstrated the program's remarkable success. Follow-up assessments conducted by the OM-GUS Women's Affairs section found that among identity-transitioned former comfort women, 72% maintained stable employment, 64% had established independent housing, and 38% had married or established families. Perhaps most significantly, only 7% required ongoing psychological services beyond standard civilian healthcare, compared to 68% requiring specialized support at recovery program entry. The long-term success stemmed from practical integration support extending beyond identity protection. American authorities recognized that economic self-sufficiency formed the essential foundation for psychological recovery. Military government records show implementation of education grants, 3,200 scholarships by 1948, small business loans, 1,160 approved applications, and vocational certification programs in 24 fields specifically selected for post-war economic viability. This economic pragmatism distinguished American rehabilitation from well-intentioned but ultimately unsustainable charity approaches. Maria Hoffman, recovered from a Bavarian facility in 1945, reflected on this transition in a rare 1951 interview. The Americans understood something fundamental about dignity that others missed. They knew we needed not just kindness, but capability, not just compassion, but competence. They never treated us as permanently damaged, but as temporarily interrupted. The best gift wasn't protection, but preparation. They made us ready to stand entirely on our own. The American occupation's economic investment in former victims yielded unexpected dividends as Germany rebuilt. By 1950, women who had entered rehabilitation programs with minimal education or work experience had achieved remarkable professional positions. Military government assessment records from February 1950 documented former program participants employed as medical technicians, administrative managers, retail supervisors, and government clerks. Several had established small businesses, particularly in emerging sectors like tourism services supporting occupation personnel. October 1975, University of Munich Conference Hall. The elegant 55-year-old woman approached the podium with confident strides, her academic robes signaling her position as professor of social policy. Only a handful of the assembled scholars knew that Dr. Elisabeth Kaufmann had once been prisoner, Nachschrift 437, at a Nazi comfort facility. Her keynote address on gender and justice in post-war reconstruction represented the culmination of a 30-year journey from object to expert, from victim to visionary. As she arranged her notes, she paused to acknowledge the elderly American woman seated in the front row, former Captain Eleanor Westfield, now visiting as a distinguished consultant on humanitarian protocols. The transformation of former comfort women profoundly influenced West German social development. Government records from 1950-1975 revealed direct connections between American rehabilitation innovations and German policy evolution. The Federal Republic's landmark 1952 Victim Compensation Law incorporated confidentiality protections modeled on American identity protection systems. The 1957 Women's Equal Rights Act, built upon economic independence principles, pioneered in occupation-era rehabilitation programs. Most significantly, West Germany's comprehensive 1961 social services framework established trauma-informed care as a foundational approach for all victim services, a direct legacy of American protocols developed for former comfort women. Statistical evidence documents this profound societal transformation. A confidential 1972 follow-up study commissioned by the German Federal Ministry for Family Affairs located 1,743 former rehabilitation program participants who consented to anonymous assessment. The results demonstrated remarkable life trajectories. 83% reported stable employment histories. 77% had completed additional education beyond program participation. 64% had married, and 71% owned their homes. Most tellingly, when asked to rate their life satisfaction on a 10-point scale, participants averaged 7.3, statistically identical to the general female population's 7.4 average. The influence extended beyond individual outcomes to institutional development. Military occupation records from 1949 document the transfer of rehabilitation methodologies to emerging German institutions. Former rehabilitation center staff, both American and German, became key personnel in West Germany's social welfare administration. Training protocols developed for working with traumatized women became standard curriculum in German social work education. Most importantly, the principle that recovery required both psychological healing and practical self-sufficiency became foundational to German social policy, distinguishing it from purely therapeutic approaches. The American military's experience with comfort women rehabilitation directly shaped later humanitarian protocols. When Lieutenant General William Yarborough commissioned the comprehensive Civilian Protection during Military Operations Manual in 1962, he explicitly incorporated lessons from the German experience. This document established protection of vulnerable women as a specific operational category requiring specialized training and resources. By 1967, all American military units deployed internationally received mandatory training on civilian protection protocols developed directly from the post-war German experience. The multi-generational impact emerged most visibly in Germany's approach to later humanitarian crises. When civil war in Yugoslavia created waves of traumatized refugees in 1992, German response teams implemented protocols remarkably similar to those pioneered with comfort women nearly 5 decades earlier. Comprehensive services combining psychological support with practical self-sufficiency tools, identity protection systems, and economic integration pathways. Germany's internationally recognized expertise in trauma recovery for conflict-affected women traces directly to methodologies developed during American occupation. Greta Müller, who had arrived at rehabilitation center The Friars 17 with nothing but a small bag of possessions in 1945, reflected on this transformation in a rare 1978 interview. What the Americans provided wasn't simply healing, but a methodology for rebuilding shattered lives. They showed us that recovery wasn't about erasing the past, but about creating a future where the past lost its power. When I hear American occupation, I don't think of soldiers or government. I remember the women who showed us that dignity wasn't something given to us. It was something we could reclaim through our own efforts with proper support. As Professor Kaufmann concluded her keynote address, she noted the presence of several young women from the university's social policy program, the next generation of humanitarian professionals. The legacy of American innovation lives in these students, she observed. They will never know that their advanced trauma-informed methodologies originated with women like me who once stood paralyzed with fear before American soldiers, declaring, "We won't take our clothes off." What began as terrified defiance evolved into a revolution in human dignity. The transformation of German comfort women through American rehabilitation represents history's most progressive victory. A battle won not through retribution, but through restoration. Not through punishment, but through potential. Not through control, but through capacity building. The women who entered American protection as traumatized victims emerged as architects of a more humane society, carrying forward the revolutionary message that recovery came through dignity, not dependency.